This program is brought to you by UCKG.
Hello and welcome to another inspiring episode of A Different Kind of Woman. A Different Kind of Woman always aims to be just. Now, when parents engage in custody battles over their children, they do so under the guise that it is in their children's best interest. But is that generally true? Well, on today's show, Custody Battles, we'll be discussing this and much more. And joining me are my lovely co-hosts, Liliana. Hi, welcome. And someone we haven't seen in a while, but glad to have you. Hi, Lisa.
Good to be back.
Glad to have you. Now, today we're discussing custody battles, and I don't know kind of like your background as children, but did you grow up with both your parents in the same house all the time?
No. My parents did get divorced when I was younger.
So a part of your life, you had both your parents, and then at some point they separated.
Yeah.
But how about you, Lilian?
I was going to say the same thing. They were together, separated, stayed with mum, but my mum always kept the contact with my father, so I never kind of was distant away from my dad. So
now, under that circumstance, like if you were to be given the choice, if the choice was up to you and was not made for you, would you have chosen to, it's kind of like, I know I'm going to put you on the spot, and your parents better close your ears, plug your ears for this one. But would you have chosen to live with your mom or your dad if the choice was up to you?
I was so young when it happened that that wasn't really an option for me to choose. And what I would say is that at the time, everything was done so nicely. So we didn't know any of the dramas, any of the problems that had gone on between my parents and why they were separating. So my mum was brilliant about that. And it's only years later, you know, that when we're adult enough to make up our own minds and see for ourselves, that my mum told us some of the things that went on. And afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, and you were dealing with all of that?
When you didn't know.
No, but what was brilliant is my dad's side of the family, there was never any issues. So I always saw my grandparents growing up, my aunties, my cousins. So there was never any issues. They made it that it was between them two and it wasn't about us.
I mean, that's an ideal thing.
Yeah, exactly. With me, I'm going to be honest, I would choose my mum. And I did kind of choose my mum. Not that they asked me, oh, who do you want to stay with? But I just felt more comfortable with my mum, and maybe because I'm a girl as well, I don't know, but me personally, I would have just chose my mum.
You identified with her because you both were females. Well, as you know, I never had the choice because my dad passed away when I was 4 months, so I only grew up with my mom by force of nature. But let's see what the people on the streets of London had to say. Who would they have chosen? Well, let's find out.
When parents separate, should children always remain with their mother? Results of a YouGov poll shows that 84% of people believe that both parents should have equal rights of the custody of their children. Almost 1 in 10 Britain, that's 9%, believe that mothers should have most rights over the custody of the children. Only 2% thinks that the father should have most rights over the custody of the children. 1 in 3 couples, about 250,000 adults, separate each year, leaving 350,000 children affected. A study found that 1/3 of children whose parents had broken up in the last 20 years had sought solace in drugs, while 10% fell suicidal or got involved in crime. 9 out of 10 children of separating or divorcing couples live most of the times with a mother. The Association of Shared Parenting believes that children need to live with both parents to be balanced. However, Women's Aid are concerned that proper risk assessment are not in place. Karen Woodall of the advice group Centre for Separated Families believe that the British people's social norms are that fathers are usually the providers while Mothers are the carers. There is no official data on shared parenting. However, it is estimated that 500,000 families do it. We may embrace the idea of shared parenting, but would we want that when we were children? Or would we just want to stay in the same bed every night? Around 10% of family breakdowns end up in court because of safety concerns or power struggles. All research shows that children thrive when both parents play a big role in their lives. Let's find out what the public thinks. As a child, if you had to choose to live with your mother or father, who would you have chosen and why?
Oh, nah, I can't answer that, to be honest. I have no idea. Nah, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. I love my parents equally. I couldn't separate one or another. Definitely not. 100% not.
I mean, I'd rather live on my own, if that could make sense. I don't want to pick one or the other. So potentially, if they both lived on the same street, I'd want to live with them both, you know?
I don't think I could choose.
No, me neither. Me neither. I'd happily do half and half if I had to.
Definitely.
I think I would have chosen my mum, mainly because generally I think I had a better bond with her, and I just think from psychologically, I think I grew up closer to my mum than my dad, and I think she'd be more caring. Although I love my dad, but it's better just to see him on weekends. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Same thing, I'd choose my mum, just because I think there's always that maternal instinct and just the bond's never broken.
I think I would choose my mother, but I would make sure that I saw my dad enough so that he didn't feel like I favoritised her.
I would say probably my mother, just because she would be more nurturing.
What do you think of shared parenting? 50% with mom and 50% with dad?
I mean, I don't really think it should be shared. It should be a family. That's the way it is. Family, together. Tell them to get along, just so you can be like a group, a gang.
Yeah. What can I say?
What can you say?
I agree with it. You have to deal with life, you know? So if your parents don't get along, you don't have to get them to get along for you to get along with them individually. It's all about you, you know?
Yeah, I think it's only fair.
Yeah, definitely. Half and half.
So I think that'd be really, really good because then you're still having a bond with both. But I definitely think that it would get to the stage in my life where it starts to become a bit of a nightmare, constantly switching between the two. And I think it would start getting to the point where I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't be with either parent anymore because it's getting too frustrating. I think it's good though it's really good on the child on me, because I'd still have the, influence of both parents and both dad and mum.
I think that's really good because then you get kind of both influence of a father influence and the mother as well. But then I also just think, again, it would be really just annoying and frustrating. But then as well, you get the whole thing where the parents are more competing with each other. Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think it's all just dependent on what the child wants more than what the parents want.
Obviously, it's not ideal. It's great when parents can work it out. But ultimately, your parents first. And when two people can put their differences aside and actually parent, I think that's the most important thing.
Definitely needs to be taken into consideration whether the child actually has a good relationship with their father or mother. Vice versa, if the child doesn't have a good relationship with their father, then they're not going to want to spend 50% of their time. And sort of emphasising what they said, that can be frustrating because if a child doesn't want to be with someone, then they're not going to be in a good mood, and it will be obvious to the parent that the child doesn't want to spend time with them, which can upset the parent as well. So I think it's a good idea, but certain factors need to be taken into consideration.
Well, that was it for today from the streets of London, and it's back to you in studio.
Well, thank you very much, Priscilla. Now we had a variety of opinions there. Indeed. I really liked what one gentleman said. Well, if you can't get your parents to be together, if they have to separate, it's not about trying and forcing them to be together, but trying to get along with each of them individually. And we see that that's not always the case. Normally, the parents try to make their children take sides. Why do you think that is?
Oh, goodness. I honestly, thinking about it, if for any reason there was violence or maybe an abusive relationship, on the mother's side, let's just say it for an example, I think the mother wouldn't want the child to be with the father. So I believe they will influence, no, stay with me, daddy's a bad person, or, you know.
Yeah, but I think even in that case, the law itself would,
of course,
would forbid it, right?
Yeah.
If I mean, if that's the case and there was proven that there was violence, I don't think of any court that's going to give shared custody to the father.
See, I think it all depends on how the relationship has ended. You know, even though a lot of times we'll say, oh, we mutually agreed to separate. I'm like, really? You know, you don't just wake up and decide, okay, I don't want to be next to you anymore. There's breakdowns in communications and things like that. And I think if it ends in a way that you can't be civil, then people start to be ultra competitive. It's like, no, I paid for that, I want that. I want, you know, people start to get petty. And instead of putting the children's needs above everything else, they're thinking of the children as still property that I need to bargain over, that I need to compete over. And so it's almost like they're thinking that, right, I can't have your affection, so I'm going to compete for the person that I can get. Like, I contributed to that, that's 50% mine, you know. And it's really unfortunate that people don't think of the psychological effects that can have on a child. They're not supposed to be worrying about who's giving me love from the parenting side. They're just like, I'm here because you guys put me here, so, you know, treat me like you both still love me and you both still care about me.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. I think during that time, parents focus on their issues, on what they're going through, but they're not really thinking that the child is actually going through a loss as well. So the child is not a piece of furniture. The child is not a piece of property that you fight over, that you guys want to, you know, do power struggle over. That child is also separating from one of you. That child is also separating from the family that they knew, and they need you to step in as a parent. They need you to be able to put your differences aside, at least where she's involved or he's involved. If you can't do it for both of you, if you can't put your differences aside for both of you to get along, where your child or children are concerned, then you do need to put your differences aside. I think parents at that time forget that many times, because it happens when the children are still young, sometimes they think, well, the children are not aware, they don't know what's going on. But children do feel. How young were you when your parents separated?
I believe around probably 6, 7. And I was very aware of everything.
Exactly.
It just, come on, daddy's not home anymore. Like, it was visible. I could tell. But again, because every weekend my mum made sure, okay, we'll travel to where my dad was to see him. I wouldn't spend the whole day, but let's say lunchtime at least, we'll just eat together as a family. And then I am honest to say, my mum used to always tell me, your dad will tell you one day why we separated. And my mum used to always say that, and I would be like,
That's good. She didn't want to speak for
She
him.
didn't. She never did. It was only when I became a teenager, when I was old enough, my father actually had to sit down and tell me why they separated.
Exactly. So parents, keep that in mind. Your children also are going through that separation together with you. Now we're going to take a short break, but stay tuned and take a look at what's coming up next. We're going to role play how to tell the children you're separating.
We've decided that sometimes friends have to live in separate places.
What do you mean?
Well, it doesn't affect you. Don't worry about that. You'll still see mummy and daddy.
Yes.
Other way round even.
Welcome back on today's show, Custody Battles. We've been discussing shared parenting. Now, not all of us are mothers, and not all of us have been through a divorce. But when you are separating from your children's father, how you tell your children can be difficult to approach. So ladies, imagine that you and your partner have children and are separating when you respond to these questions. Okay? So imagine you have children, imagine you're married. Oh, Liliana, you don't have to imagine that you're married, Lisa, for now. But imagine that you have children and you're getting a divorce. Now, when is it the best time to tell them that you are separating?
I think that as soon as me and my partner have decided to separate, the best time is to then tell the children as soon as possible. making it drag on, I think, makes you know, partner have to walk on eggshells. You know, things might be a bit acrimonious between you. So how you, you know, the children are not silly. These days, children walk out of the womb talking. You know, they're that advanced that they can pick up when things have changed. You know, there's tension in the atmosphere. So as soon as you've made the decision, the children have to know as soon as possible, as close to that point.
When would you tell your children, Lily?
Goodness, like I wish I was like Lisa, knew straight away, but I'm going to be honest. I really don't know, because I think it has to do so much with the circumstances, with how everything, just how the dynamic of the family is. I mean, it could be like when you said, but then other people might say, no, we need some time, because maybe the mum still's very hurt and there's still a lot of emotions, and if they go and tell the child in that moment, they would pass all that hurt to the child, and then the child could start ending up not liking the other father or mother. So for me, I'm going to be honest, it's tricky. I genuinely don't know. I think it has to be like how you said in your example, when you feel ready. I think it has to do with when the mother and father see that they're ready to tell.
But I think, I mean, it can't be a rushed thing. The parents have to be willing to, after then, focus on their children, because then children will have questions, children will have their own reactions, like, Mommy, Daddy, you're separating. And so they have to be there to calm their children through the situation, make sure that the children is not going to lose any of them. You know, Mommy and Daddy are separating, but we're here for you. You're not losing any of us, and we're gonna be living in separate houses, but you know, this is how things are gonna go. And I think that parents need to do it when they have the details finalized. So when they already know, for example, where the father will be living, when the father will be leaving the house, where they will be living, and how, you know, they're gonna share the child. So okay, so 3 days you're gonna be with mom, 4 days you're gonna be with dad. So when they have those details finalized, I think that's the time when they tell the children, and it should be with the children's best interest in mind. When you have that conversation, it should be about your child. You should be thinking that your child is also going through that havoc with you, and that's something that parents don't keep in mind. Now, what do you think will be the immediate impact on the children once they hear that you're separating? So as soon as they receive the news, what do you imagine is the immediate impact on the child?
I think if obviously they were a really good family unit and the child was really not aware, and you know, it came as a surprise, I think straight away they would be sad. Like, it would just, and to be honest, I've met friends that they thought it was their fault. Again, I don't know why children have this, but they generally thought, oh, is it because of me? Why? Oh my goodness, Mommy, Daddy don't love me anymore. But I think automatically the child just starts questioning and feeling sad. But I'm honest to say, I have met other people in secondary school when they got separated. There was this kind of fashion, if I could say, where, I'm being honest, when I was in secondary school, where it was like, oh, my parents are separating, that means I get extra presents and extra gifts and extra stuff. I'm being honest, I had one friend who was a student where she was like, oh yeah, my parents are separating, but I'm okay with that because I can go on 2 holidays a year now. I can go on, so...
See, I think it all depends on the situation, because for a child to be like that, I believe it's because the parents have been able to be, you know, they've been able to come together to make sure that child doesn't feel unsettled. Because for a lot of children, you know, it can be that their routine has been shook. You know, their foundation has been shook. They don't know, you know, what's up and what's down. It depends on the situation. Like me personally, I can't even tell you that I remember when my parents separated and when we moved into a different house, because my mum made sure that we still saw my dad. The years later, she told us there were times that, you know, sometimes he played a bit of like silly beggars and she would get us ready to be picked up and he wouldn't turn up. I don't remember any of that. I just remember my mum you know, never cussing my dad in front of me, no matter how he'd done, no matter how he acted. And I think this is the key. But again, it all depends on the nature of the situation. If there was violence in the relationship, then it might be that the child didn't see the violence happening and they're wondering, why is mummy taking me away from daddy, and not realising it? So mummy is doing the best that she can do because she obviously has to put the safety of her kids first. So that child might still be shook and their foundation's been shook and they don't know why. And that's a whole different ball game and something that cannot be smoothed over easily. So it all depends on the nature of the situation, because I was all right. But as I said, whatever happened between my mum and dad, I didn't know about. And it wasn't crazy. You know? So,
and we have a friend who told I have a friend who's told us her story, and she actually blamed herself. So you never even think that may be a possibility, but she blamed herself. So she thought, oh, if I had just been a better child, then daddy would not have felt the need to leave the house. So for her, the separation wasn't between daddy and mommy, it was between daddy and her. She thought that the dad was separating from her, not from the mom. So that's another thing as well. That's something that parents maybe may not consider, you know, that it can cross their children's mind, that they may think that they are the reason why the other parent is leaving. So take that into consideration as well, parents, when you're dealing with the separation between you and your kids. Now, using information from the Parent Connection Charities Workbook, we are going to do a role play. You ladies better be prepared on how to approach the subject. Now, you imagine that you are the parents and you're going to sit with me, your child, to explain the decision. So you're gonna do a role play on how you're gonna do all of that. Now, imagine I am a 6-year-old who has up till now had a very happy home. I've never seen you guys fight. I've never seen you guys, for me, you've always seemed like a united unit. You've always seemed united. So I have never been exposed to any of your issues. No, how will you explain the decision in a way that I will understand? Explain it to me. Sit me down.
I'm looking at Lisa
and tell me that mommy and daddy are separating. So who's going to be the mommy or who's going to be the daddy?
She's more the mummy and the daddy. Okay. In a skirt.
Top one. She's like, yeah. Then she's like, oh, so sweet. So you're the mommy. You're the mommy. You're the daddy. I'm the child, the 6-year-old who's had a happy family, and you're now explaining to me that you're separating.
I think it should be mummy first.
Should be mummy first. Oh goodness. Oh gosh. Okay. Okay, I'm going to be honest. How I am, I wouldn't...
Role play, don't explain it, just act it out.
Oh, but it's like, I wouldn't do it sitting down, like in a, let's sit down, and I would never do that.
We're in studio, so we have to
do it like this.
So let's pretend like this is a park then. We're sitting in a restaurant or whatever. What would you choose? I would choose like a park, like where we're free, like, you know, where the child doesn't feel like this is a serious moment. A very beautiful park, and we're sitting on the grass, and we have a picnic before us.
This is so nerve-wracking. Wow, parents, how do you do it? Wow. Hi, Motinha.
Hi, Mommy. So glad to be here.
Oh, are you enjoying yourself today?
Well, Mommy, I really wanted to be watching the movie, but anyway, you brought me here today.
So, me and Daddy, we wanted to tell you something really important, but not to worry. It's nothing.
It's nothing too bad.
It's nothing too bad.
Okay.
We love you. We're your parents.
Are we going to Disneyland?
Maybe one day.
Maybe
one day. But Mommy just wanted to let you know that me and Daddy are still friends.
Yes.
We're very good friends. We're still friends, but oh gosh.
So we've decided that sometimes friends have to live in separate places.
What do you mean?
Well, it doesn't affect you. Don't worry about that. You'll still see Mummy and Daddy.
Yes.
Other way round even. But it's just that we're going to look after you still the same way, you're still going to get the same love, the same attention, same tellings off.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, we don't have a lot of time to extend this role play, but clearly we can see that it's not an easy thing to do.
No, not at all.
So definitely this cannot be a conversation that parents just have without thinking it through, without taking time to really understand what it is that they're going to communicate to their children, how they're going to approach it, what is the final message that they want to leave with their child. Because it's definitely not easy. We're just role playing. So imagine if this were true and we really, really had to think of our child's best interest. It wouldn't be an easy conversation to have. So parents, don't rush it. Don't do it without thinking about it, without planning for it. Make sure that you think of the location, because one thing is that location, and I agree with you. Do it in a place that's not your home. Like maybe take them to the park, because that location will always represent a location where they receive the bad news. So from then on, it becomes bad memory, that location.
I think it depends on how you do it and where you do it. Because if your child is if you're telling them and the child is going to react in a bad way, crying, all the rest of it, then a public place might not be the best place, because they're going to think everyone's looking at me. So I think it's something that you two have to agree on together and see what's the best way forward.
But do kind of think take into consideration that place is always going to trigger that memory. So you don't want it to be a place where they're exposed to all the time. Even if you have to borrow a friend's home and go to a friend's home and ask the friend to give you space or things like that, and plan for it. And I say that because that's something that's psychological, and I know we're extending our time, I'm sorry, but that's something that's psychological. Even doctors, for example, and doctors say that you have to take into consideration the place where you deliver bad news, because then that place now becomes associated with that bad memory, and you don't want it to be a place where people always walk around, so that bad memory is not always triggered. All right? So we're going to take a short break, but don't go away. Take a look at the interesting women that will be joining us after the break. Next, we'll be hearing from family lawyer Elizabeth Hicks, and Yolanda Napoli will be joining us in the studio to share her experience.
So a good family lawyer will sit down with their client and talk about the issues, and then pick up the phone or write to the other side and see if you can resolve them without going to court.
He did have an issue that he wanted his custody, but I didn't fight. I didn't go to lawyers or anything like that, because it didn't make sense for me, and I knew that he wasn't going to get the custody anyway because of everything that he was involved with.
Welcome back. So far on today's show, Custody Battles, we've been discussing how to tell your children you're separating. Now, our team went to find out how custody works in the UK from family lawyer Elizabeth Hicks. Let's take a look.
I was inspired to become a family lawyer really in order to help people. I know that may sound trite, but it's the reality. I see it as a journey that people embark on. I see people when they're really at their worst, when they're getting separated or going through a divorce. And I like to think that I've somehow made a difference. So at the end of the journey, they walk off and I've sorted out their divorce, sorted out the financial aspects, and obviously helped with the children as well. So a good family lawyer will sit down with their client and talk about the issues, and then pick up the phone or write to the other side and see if you can resolve them without going to court. Court is always the last resort. We now have a number of mechanisms in this country for trying to resolve disputes before they get to court. So there's the possibility of mediation, which involves the parents sitting down with a mediator, and the mediator's role is to try and facilitate an agreement between the two of them. Now, sometimes parents say, well, there's no way I'm going to sit down with my spouse. And that's fine, because you can also have shuttle mediation, which is where the mediator will shuttle from one room to another and then try and broker a deal between the parents. Another option that's come in recent times is something called the Separated Parent Information Plan, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but that's something that is run across England and Wales. The cost is £150. It's something that the parents have to pay for themselves, but what it does is it educates them on what it's like to actually parent their children when they're separated. They don't attend it together. It's small groups of about 8 to 10 parents, and it's absolutely invaluable. I've had numerous clients who've gone on this plan and they think it's brilliant because what it does, it makes them look at separation from the children's perspective. It's not about them as the grown-ups, it's about the children and what's best for the children. There's also the possibility of what's called arbitration, which is an alternative to the court process. Rather than going to a courtroom, you'd sit in a solicitor's office or in a barrister's office, and you'd have a senior solicitor or a senior barrister who would make a decision, having heard the evidence, having heard what the case was about. So that's also a good way of keeping things out of court. There's also another possibility, which is called collaborative family law. And collaborative family law means that both parents at the outset sign up with their respective lawyers to an agreement that says that if they can't reach an agreement through a series of meetings, they have to sack their lawyers in order to instruct new solicitors to go to court. So it was described to me before I trained as essentially you velcro yourself to the table until such time as a deal is done. So the way that the court determines how parenting time should be divided between the parents is governed by an act called the Children Act 1989. And essentially what the court says is you always look at what is in the best interest of the child. The welfare of the child is paramount. And then there's a whole list of factors that the court will take into account. The child or the children's wishes and feelings is one of those factors. Now sometimes parents will say, well, a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old child doesn't want to see the other parent, so therefore they shouldn't see them. It's not as clear-cut as that. You then have to look into, well, why does that child not want to see the other parent? There are other factors the court takes into account as well, such as the emotional needs of the child, any physical disabilities that the child has, the reason why one parent may be objecting to the child going to see the other parent. So wishes and feelings are a factor, but it's not all determinative. Parents will sometimes say things in the nicest possible way to manipulate their children. They may do it overtly, they may do it without realising it, because tensions and emotions are running very high. And that's why a third party, neutral, independent, such as an independent social worker or court and family reporter, really gets to the heart of the issue. What are the issues between the parents and how can they be addressed? The advice I would give would be, please think about this. You're the grown-ups. The children are your children. At the end of the day, they're half of the person that you're separating from or divorcing. You made that child together. So always think, if you're going to start saying something bad about the other parent, don't do it, because that child is half of each of you. So really try and keep the arguments away from the children.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that great advice. So there you have it, parents. This is an end of the journey, but it still has to be amicable. It still has to be done in a way that it is best for your children. And yes, do keep your arguments far, far away from your children. Although sometimes emotions come through, although sometimes you get taken over, but always keep your children's best interest in mind. Now, joining us in studio is Yolanda Napoli, who was able to do exactly as we're saying, protect her children from the difficulties of her separation from their father. Now, welcome, Yolanda. Good to have you in our studio.
Thank you.
We're familiar with you. I mean, maybe you are a stranger to our viewers, but we know each other very well. And we can tell that, you know, the separation happened could be because of your children, because of what we've witnessed from your children. But that doesn't always happen for many parents. So can you explain how you managed to do it so well?
Well, it didn't happen like that. Very, very amicable. I did have a few issues with the first father. We did make many mistakes. We were very young, and we could have worked it out in another way, more rational way, to be honest, because it has affected my son big time. But the main thing is I never ever kept my son away from his dad. Never. I always made sure that even though we had problems, that we weren't getting on, that he had, I always chase him up for him to spend time with my son. And I always fought to back up each other on how to educate him and everything. It didn't start until like when he was 8, 9 years old. I started to, because we separated when he was 3, and really things started to work out when he was 8, 9 years old. I did have an issue. He did have an issue that he wanted his custody, but I didn't fight. I didn't go to lawyers or anything like that because it didn't make sense for me, and I knew that he wasn't going to get the custody anyway because of everything that he was involved with. So, but it doesn't matter how the dad is, how bad it can be, you know, it is his dad.
So you say that things changed when he was about 8. So what changed? What did you start doing right that made the situation change to in a positive way?
He started to be more present. As my son was growing, obviously he was able to do more things with him. So they became, from 8, 9 years old, they became very, very, very close. So close that he even wanted to keep him all the time. But I didn't fight for that. I didn't, you know, I knew that he couldn't take him away from me. So I always try, you know, to speak to him. Even he had a girlfriend at that time, and I started to get involved as well, speak more with his girlfriend, with the dad's girlfriend. You know, because if my son was gonna be with them too, then he's gonna be with his dad. Will probably be with his girlfriend as well. So I always try to keep a good relationship with them, and through them, then I was able to get to his dad. And we even had a meeting once, and I said, you know, without my son present, I said, look, we have to start backing up each other, because, you know, it got to a point when my son will go to me and will ask me for something, I would say no, and then said, okay, I'll go to that, and he would say yes. And we wouldn't know.
Sorry, how did you tell him though first that you guys were separating? So, and I know that you're speaking about what happened afterwards, but how did you tell him?
We didn't, because he was 3 years old. So, as I said, we were very young and we made many mistakes. So, what I used to tell them is, you're so lucky you have 2 homes. You know, you have 2 homes, and, you know, you can go from one home to the other, but that caused a lot of unstable for him. That was.
I wanted to ask you, I know that you already spoke about the custody part, but just to mention, when he did want the custody, how did you feel? What was your reaction? Because I know there's some mums out there that when that does happen, they might be anxious, they might get a bit scared, or they might just start going to lawyers and going crazy. I don't know. So how was your reaction?
Well, I wasn't worried about that at all. Once, because we were never married. So by law, he was my full custody at that time. Now it has changed. It has changed. But when he was born in 1998, that was the case. So I knew that. So I wasn't worried at all. I didn't even research.
So you were aware of basically kind of right?
He was like threatening and all that, but I said, you know, I was fine. I knew. You know, I always said to him, look, if you want to spend 1 week, 2 weeks with him, if you want to take him on holidays, then that's fine. He's your son. You know, what can you do? As long as you bring him back to me. And he came to terms that he understood that. He said, oh, okay, she's never going to take him away from me. So I will always be able to, you know, even if he calls me one day, oh, can I take Joey? Yeah, of course. That's nice. You know, so we started to, as I said, I went through the girlfriend, you know, because I always push it, you know, parents have to have their time, the quality time with their children. They always have to, we have to think about our children. And as long as the love and affection, these things that, unfortunately, these unavoidable things that happen, like, you know, we could have worked it out, but as I said, we didn't. And the second marriage as well, it just was no way. For me, I saw it, the second marriage, I did fight even more, but there was no way we could keep together. Yeah. There was no way. So
I think that the thing that made it work was that you didn't turn your child into a power struggle between you and his dad. So it wasn't like, okay, he's mine, no, he's yours, no, he's mine.
No.
You made sure that the dad felt comfortable, that he would always have a place in the child's life. And once everyone saw that they had a place in each other's life, things kind of fell into place. Thank you so much, Yolanda, for coming and sharing your insight, what you did right, what you did wrong, and how you turned the situation around so that it can help a lot of you out there who are about to go through a similar situation. Now we're going to take a short break, but don't go away, as we'll be back with more on custody battles. And here's a sneak peek on what's coming up after the break. Next, find out what James Redford, Robert Redford's son, has to say about custody battles and his new film, Resilience, the biology of stress and the science of hope.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains.
In the States, 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. It's widespread, it's common. And yet we really don't think about the fact that there's so many different ways that people divorce.
Welcome back to today's show, Custody Battles. Now, our team went to meet James Redford to find out more about his film. Let's take a look at what they found out.
So the first thing that we found is that adverse childhood experiences are common. The first thing I looked at was smoking and saw that as the count of categories of ACEs went up, the percentage of people that smoked went up, and I was astonished. I'd never seen something like that before. And then I started looking at all the other things like alcohol abuse and depression and teenage pregnancy and heart disease, and saw that as the score went up, all of these major public health problems that we'd collected as part of the survey went up in a stepwise fashion.
There's a lot of hope there because we know what the cure is. We know how to take better care of our kids. It comes down to something pretty simple, compassion. And sometimes a little medical evidence helps us engage our compassion a little more deeply. Some of us need more sort of concrete proof that it works than just being an attribute or moral quality.
The amygdala obviously here has greater activation in the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma, didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion, in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains.
In the States, 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. It's widespread, it's common. And yet we really don't think about the fact that there's so many different ways that people divorce. And there's so many different ways that plays out for children. And I think this research about adverse experiences and how they affect children's development just shows just how important it is to think of that traumatic experience as a neurotoxin. It comes down to 2 things. Even if they don't engage in self-soothing behaviors that are destructive long-term, such as overeating, or smoking, or drugs, or drinking, unprotected sex, even if they don't engage in those behaviors, kids who aren't given a compassionate help can still have a risk later on in life of health problems because of the way that stress wears the body down. No one wants divorce for anybody, but if it happens, the most important thing has to be the well-being of the child. And in some cases, divorce is the right thing because the environment in the home is so toxic that, relatively speaking, it's a better outcome for the child for the parents to divorce, particularly if there's a lot of verbal and physical abuse going on in the home. So it really isn't about whether or not divorce is right or wrong. In my mind, it's more about, you know, in the case that it does happen, that you're just always putting the well-being of the child first and foremost.
We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, I mean, for many of us, it's just not true.
When you grow up in these type of situations, it's not something you talk about.
It takes a lot for things to weave their way into our collective consciousness. But it happens. If something is true, it's inevitable that it happens. I just think we're at a time now where we're ready to deal with this, because after all, you're having to confront some taboo topics like sexual abuse and mental illness in the home and violence in the home. These are not easy things to talk about. So you see, that fundamental mind shift underneath everything is really important, and the rest, as said in the movie, if you get the right information to the public, they will invent very wise actions.
There was this incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
Exposure to trauma affects children's developing brains. The impact is on your behavior, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that?
I don't reach out because I'm not used to that.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
No child should be punched or kicked. No child should be punched or kicked.
Well, there you have it, parents. Do not make this a traumatic experience for your children. Now, one of the things that we see going on during custody battles is parents trying to buy the loyalty of their children, you know, offering the gadgets. Nowadays, we have so many gadgets to offer: mobile phones, not iPads, but not necessarily iPads, but tablets. Tablets. So we have so many things that you can offer children, expensive holidays. And how do you think this affects the children, this tug of war for the loyalty of their children?
Again, I think it all depends on how the child has been brought up. But I think everyone's heads can be turned by a pretty gift or a nice gadget, isn't it? And I think at first, the first instinct is not necessarily that they're trying to buy my affection. And it can backfire. But I think, like I said earlier, it's when people are forgetting about, you know, the children's needs first of all, and just thinking about competing for someone else's, you know, loyalty and admiration and love, and just wanting to have that rather than thinking about the child.
I mean, taking from Yolanda's experience, I think it all depends on how the other parent reacts. So if you see that, you know, my ex-partner is not very confident, is kind of going through insecurity issues, and so is trying to buy the loyalty of my child, how you react can take the situation either one way or the other. So if you are going to then engage in the tug of war and, you know, try and, okay, so now I'm going to one-up him and I'm going to one-up her and I'm going to, you know, buy a better gift. Obviously, as I think there's no kid who's not going to fall for it. I mean, kids fall for sweets.
It's the truth.
Kids
it's
fall for
show me a handbag of yours.
So if you put a gadget in front of the child, or you take them to an expensive holiday, it's pretty much self-explanatory that they're going to fall for it.
Exactly.
But the reaction of the other parent can turn the situation either to one side or the other, right? So instead of you engaging and making it a tug of war, why not build the confidence of your ex-partner? And I know that, you know, if you have separated in a way that's not really amicable, that may seem like, oh, how am I going to build someone's confidence? I don't want to be involved with his issues. I separated because I don't want to deal with his issues. But you're not dealing with it because of you. You're dealing with it because of your child, because of how that affects your child. So Yolanda's example was was perfect. Instead of making it a war, she supported him and said, you know, he'll always be in your life. I'm not here to take him away from you. I'm not here to make this about us. Got involved in certain things that made him feel more confident in being a participant parent in the child's life. And that's it. And you had an experience to share about a friend that you had.
So I have a friend, we're very close, and she would always share with us.
I just have to say, we don't have a lot of time, so
yes, I'll go very quick. And just to cut, so she would tell me that what would happen was her father, every time he would come to see them, he would constantly say bad things about her mum, like constantly, very bad things, call her mum names all the time. And how that affected her and her brother was that they started to see the mum in that way. So they would disrespect the mum, they would come home whatever time they wanted. They generally even sometimes would use the same words the dad would say to their mum, like, oh, you're stupid, oh, you're dumb, things like that. And she would say, she never thought she would do that, but because she was constantly hearing that from her father, she started to react in that way to her mum.
So you see, parents, you are very influential in your children's lives. You're very influential, and the decision that you're taking to separate, though it is between you, that decision has a lot of influence over your child, bears a lot of influence over your child. And I think the two of you need to make it not only about the two of you, but also about your child. And the same way that you're trying to find the best way between the two of you, you know, who gets this, who gets what, the same way that you're trying to work out things between the two of you, do work out things for your child who does not have a voice in this matter. Your child cannot, you know, be part of this, the conversations that the two of you have. So both of you need to think on behalf of the child. The child can be there and express their emotions and you know, and express their preferences. So both of you need to try and extract that from the child, or influence the child in a way that they never have to feel like Lisa never had to feel the separation between the two of you. Okay, so do take your children's feelings, your children's thoughts into consideration. Now, you've heard a lot from us today, but we would like to hear your thoughts. So tell us your thoughts on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, or you may email us at comments@dkw.me. Now, join us next week for another exciting episode of DKW, and until then, it's goodbye.
This program is brought to you by UCKG.